Oh, sorry. Full screen. This I want to X out of. Okay. Yep, I'm good to go. I'll hit go live on my end.
All right. I think we're... I think we're...
I'm live on my end then.
I think we're...
Which is good. I'll just ask people in my comments. Hey, can you guys? We had trouble setting this up, folks. So, just give me like a thumbs up or a wave in the comments on my side if you can see us and hear us, because we had to do some workaround to get this to go.
We had to have the wizards had to come in and help us out. It's hellish.
I guess I didn't do enough Hail Marys before I hopped on or something.
All right. Anyway, here we are with the stream.
We are here.
I believe you had several topics you wanted to go over. I suppose you want to introduce what we're doing here today. I assume most people know who we are already.
Yes. I mean, we we certainly were on each other's shows a gratuitous amount of times at the end of last year, and then we had a bit of a timeline cleanse, and now we're back. But yeah, so there's three things that I was interested to discuss with you, some of which is new, some of which is carryover from some of the things we were discussing last year. Oh crap! Unfortunately, it looks like people on my end say they cannot hear me.
Oh,
hold on. Can people hear me now? Hey Phil, let me know if oh, this is disastrous. Can people hear me? I don't know how to. If people can't hear me, I don't know how to ask them to tell me if they can hear me. Hold on, let me. It says that the audio is there. And gone again. No. Okay, no. So the issue, guys, is that I'm doing a screen share to make this work, but I'm imagining on my end you guys can't hear Zulu if he tries to say something. If I unmute my mic here.
Testing. We'll see.
Can you guys hear Zulu?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
Oh, you can hear Zulu? You can hear, but okay. I don't know why that worked, but we're not going to question it. We're just gonna. All right. This is the clean start starting now. I'm Jacob Winograd. This is of course Liquid Zulu. For those of you on my end, Zulu kind of already introduced us on his end, but we had a lot of trouble getting this set up to stream to both of our channels, which we did not have all these issues last year, but we're going to power through. There's three topics that I wanted to discuss with you tonight, some of which is carryover from some of the things we were talking about at the end of last year. The first being this idea of the donut homestead, which part of me was almost like, do I want to talk about this again? But I kind of do, because I think that there is one of these. There's a continuum problem there that I think is useful to suss out, because it kind of gets to why I think people like me and I guess Dave were thinking that there wasn't a good resolution to this. But I want to start by sort of steelmanning what I know you're kind of pulling from the Blockian proviso, but I want to kind of like steelman the position on your side and then lay out where I think I at least see some potential holes if that works for you.
Sure.
So the idea behind why the donut homestead is not a legitimate homestead unless there's some kind of easement allowed is that if we say the first person there, in the middle of the donut, is homesteader A, and then someone, homesteader B comes and homesteads the entire way around them, the objection to that is that they've effectively homesteaded the first person, homesteader A's property, by encircling them and basically saying that you can't leave and it creates a contradiction where homesteader A is both obligated to not trespass, but also so they're obligated to not trespass, but that would mean that they can never leave, and so they have the freedom to leave their property, but also don't have the freedom to leave their property, which is a contradiction. And then this is a problem on top of just the practical problem of like the guy has a no easy means of of leaving his property. Is that fair enough of a summary of it?
Yeah, that's roughly correct. Of course, we can go into the details if need be.
Right. So where I struggle a little bit with this is that we would obviously agree if it wasn't, imagine it wasn't a donut yet, like it was like 99% of a donut, but there's like only one spot where the person could leave. That would be an inconvenience, perhaps, but it's not an aggression. Now we could also imagine that the last little part of the donut is like I had made this little stream or something, and all you had to do to get over it was like construct a tiny little bridge, right? And it wouldn't have to be big or expensive, but it was just like, it's on you to pay for this bridge that goes over my little property line there that I've homesteaded, that I've like created this artificial, stream or something and made it mine. It wasn't yours before. You could say like, okay, well, maybe that's okay. But the issue I see here, where I'm concerned about, is, of course, neither one of us wants to be in the position of saying that there's ever anything like a positive obligation or a positive right. And to demonstrate where I think the continuum problem is, because I feel like, put it this way, let me ask you this. Is the issue why, because if someone could say, well, technically, homesteader A can leave, because a helicopter could come pick him up. He could, if he had the technology, he could dig a hole underneath, or he could construct, even if it was a big distance, maybe he could construct a really big arched bridge that would allow him to leave. But the issue is that these are not sort of like, he needs to have a easy means of access where he could just walk or drive and not have to go to these extreme lengths to leave. Is that sort of what you're saying, or is there a different way you would answer that?
So what I'm saying is you'd have to have some natural means of getting out. Now, this is where there is a a bit of a nuance here, because if you really wanted to have this donut around somebody's property, and like the only way they could ever get out, let's say you can't even build a bridge, the only way they could get out is with a helicopter or something. You could do that if you provided them the helicopter transport. If you maintained that easement, it's like, yeah, okay, anytime you want to get out, and this does happen in common law sometimes, where, somebody needs some easement somewhere, and it's like, okay, well, we got to provide you that transport now because we're blocking you in. And fundamentally, the reason for this isn't a positive obligation that you've got to help this guy out and get him where he wants to go. It's that it stops you from having this situation where you are effectively fencing them in completely and controlling their property, controlling something that you don't own. So in your example, where you can make this little bridge, sure, that would be very easy to do, but it's not on the person who's in the donut hole to maintain some easement out. That's because that is effectively overcoming what is an aggression against them. Now, it's not on them to overcome that aggression. It's on the person who wants to have this stream go there. It's on them to maintain that easement, to allow the person access in and out of their own property.
So the standard is that it has to be a natural means of exit, which I guess basically just means walking at that point.
Yeah, or like, whatever. The standard is that you can't impose any extra barriers on top of them beyond what they already had overcome. So if it was the case that humans could jump very far and could easily just jump over this property, then it's fine. If humans could fly, then you'd have all sorts of crazy property arrangements. But naturally speaking, humans can't do these things. They would need some extra means in order to do it.
Okay. I think that makes sense. I don't think I have any disagreement there. A sort of uh, similar situation where I think it's a bit of a continuum problem, which I think you'll have a good answer for as well, is like, again, kind of a bit of a reductio case, but like imagine that it's a near donut, but not quite a donut. It's like a C, like someone drew their C was just like just the ends are almost meeting, but not quite. And then it's like they homesteaded out, like, from the gap out, so it's like here, and then forms a right angle and it goes out and it makes it's almost like making a path, right? Like I've constructed a fence and I'm building this fence out, now is there a point where it's, so it's still natural. I'm saying you can walk, but it's like, is there a point where it becomes too far, right? Like if it's like 5 meters that you have to walk in order to get around my fence, then perhaps there's no aggression there. If it was a mile, well, that's rather inconvenient. If it's 10 miles, that's, would there ever come a point, and maybe we don't know what the exact number is, but is there ever a point where it'd be like, all right, once you've made it to where the person has to walk 1 mile or 5 miles or 10 miles, now suddenly this has constituted a form of aggression?
Sure. So yeah, this is actually like something which was discussed when we were initially like not you and me, when the people in my group were initially discussing the donut problem. Is like, and you can even imagine like maybe I form like a labyrinth that you've got to get out, like a huge maze that keeps branching
Right.
out, and like you've got to figure out how to get out there. Intuitively, it definitely seems like at that reductio case where I've got like this massive shifting labyrinth of homesteads, and like there is some sort of, at the very least, an information barrier for how the hell you get out, right? So it's effectively the same as if I just had a complete fence around you. From the perspective of the person who's in there, faced with this giant maze, it might as well just be a full wall. But I don't have a good justification for what the principal difference would necessarily be at either end, because for there to be an actual continuum, there of course has to be a principal difference for the case of the really inconvenient easement versus the really convenient easement. There has to be some principal difference there. I'm not sure that anybody has discovered a principal difference there. Now, it definitely seems like there would be something to that with this crazy labyrinth example, but I'm just not sure about that.
No, that's fair. I mean, it might be one of those things where the best, I mean, like even if no one comes up with an objective standard, this is where, I suppose the jurist steps back, and just the local judges have to look at the facts on the ground and just be like, okay, even if they can't, I think some of the time, like, these are useful, I think, for sort of like pushing at, like, by the way, I see people in the comments maybe are a little confused. Just want to be clear here. We are going to talk about abortion and pro-life stuff later, but that's not the only topic we're talking about tonight. But we're going to be talking about a few other things first. So none of what we're talking about right now has any relation to kind of,
it does actually kind of relate to the baby example, because there you can have that's where I think a lot of guardianship rights come in. You can't forestall a guardianship, and that's why, by the way, I think you have to make clear, if you are wanting to evict, because I'm an evictionist, that like you have to make clear to others, like, hey, if you want to fund an artificial womb, go ahead, and like induce labor in me or whatever, but I'm out of this, right? So there is some link at least.
There's some, there is actually some link there with the forestalling and guardianship. You're correct there. But yeah, no, I think that it's this stuff is useful to talk about, to try to get the theory as sound as possible. I also think, and you would agree with me, that some of these problems are truly just like reductio cases, and it's hard to think that, in an actual free society, that, I mean, some of these things might happen, but also like, someone would have to be really awfully determined to be like, I'm going to build a labyrinth.
And you'd probably see it coming.
Leave my property.
You'd probably see it coming as well. Like, hey, this guy's got a lot of hedgerows out here,
Not to mention, I've always thought the whole donut homestead had a bit of a hole in it, at least in like a modern sense, because it's like, if homesteader A was there first, he probably already has homesteaded a road like a path to the main road,
Yeah.
which will be his no matter what. So there's kind of that thing too. But anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way because it was one of those things where I was like, I felt like I understood your arguments pretty well, but I was like, wanted to brush up those couple details there to make sure I was following. Uh, well, something I also wanted to talk about, which this will, I guess, indirectly connect to the pro-life stuff too, but your last stream, which I didn't get to catch all of it, but I caught a good part of it. You were with Monhop, and you guys were responding to Andrew Wilson, who performed, at least seemingly pretty poorly in a debate with uh, what's his
Divinity.
name? Divinity.
Yeah, it's
Right.
Liam Staten. I don't think that's doxing. I think he's pretty public with that. Um, if that is doxing, whoops. But I think he's
Whoopsie.
public.
Um, but yeah, that was a very interesting debate, and I had like sent you a super chat in it because I was trying to like, I mean, obviously you and Monhop, aren't Christians, so you're trying to almost like analyze what Andrew's position is from the perspective of not being Christians, but it was uh it was kind of funny and frustrating to me because it's like this is my exact problem with him with what you guys were what his whole debate strategy was divinity. So like I want to summarize it quick and you can I'll I guess summarize my perspective of what their sort of clash was and you can add in your own perspective from the objectivist point of view. But it felt like, divinity was just trying to sort of, point out that like, well, there are just certain proofs that um are just true that don't necessarily have to be demonstrated through some kind of like argument necessarily because this got into like what constitute a fact, and Andrew was trying to say that divinity was just kind of making a tautological argument by saying facts are facts and like some things are just true. I think the classic move, like one I've heard you talk about a lot, is that like existence exists. And it's just like, well, why is that true? It's like, well, it's true because it can't really not be true. Because what are the other options? Existence doesn't exist. Well, that's not coherent. Not existence exists. Well, that's also non-coherent. Non-existence doesn't exist. Well, that 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 just basically says nothing. So, existence exists is kind of like all you're left with. And they seem to be having this uh, almost meta debate underneath the sort of debate about like where rights come from, where Andrew was just trying to basically say, if you can't, have like some substantial argument for these certain things, you can't just claim that they're self-evident or just brute facts. And I know what he's trying to do because he's trying to play this game where he's anti-natural law and he wants the only objective law to basically be his theory of Christian ethics, which is a sole divine command theory divorced from natural law, and basically to be almost which is funny because like Andrew actually like he's trained pretty well in like logic and philosophy, and he can be pretty effective at using those in debating leftists and ripping people apart that don't have the worldview well founded. But it's almost like his end goal is almost to be like, you cannot be playing the game of moral anything, like moral philosophy or ethics or whatnot, unless you are a Christian, because everything else is just like uh, cannot be established because logic and facts cannot be self-evident. That was my sort of, I guess like meta interpretation of kind of like the debate they were having there, which I don't think Andrew was quite prepared for. But what were how would you summarize it? What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, basically, what Andrew thought he was getting into, because he misread the prompt. They had like this prompt that's like, prove me wrong on like, prove to me that like healthcare, housing, and food is a right, that communism, like it was like, say, people come on and prove to me these things. And he thought they were saying that healthcare, housing, and food was a right. So he thought he was coming on to debate like a bunch of like leftists who were going to be like just total relativists and everything. That's the debate he
Right.
thought he was going to get into. And so, of course, he came along prepared with his little like, call center script that he runs in every debate. Where, to be fair to him, It works very well when he's talking to some manner of relativist. Not so well when he's not talking to a relativist. So he's really completely floundered. He had nowhere to go. He clearly wasn't able to go off script very well at all. Divinity was able to just have an answer to everything because the guy who's actually like properly integrated his philosophy and everything. And so Andrew Wilson would he kept running these like bits of like, okay, well how do you prove that that's like, you know, a fact that you have these rights there? Well, it's based on the nature of mankind, and so he just kept running these same bits over and over and over again. And they kept falling flat one after the other. I definitely recommend anybody who hasn't seen that debate to go watch that debate. It's an incredible spectacle. There's even one point in our debate review I did with Monhop, where Andrew Wilson he tries running what we call the argument from Merriam-Webster, which is something which Dave was criticized very heavily for in his debate with Andrew. Is that Dave was like, well, if you look at a dictionary, and it's like, oh, geez, Louise, you don't want to be, if you're in the middle of like a debate on philosophy, you don't want to be saying, well, fucking Merriam-Webster says, like that is, right. You're completely, that's not, Merriam-Webster's not going to help you out when you're in such like a highly specialized field. And Andrew tries running that same gambit, and you can see me and Monhop are just fucking losing our shit, where it is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, yeah. It shows like these like pre-sup tactics. They work against a specific type of person, but that doesn't imply that the pre-sups actually have a fully integrated philosophy or anything of the sort. Which I suppose you probably disagree. You probably agree that they don't have that either, because presumably you have some other Christian grounding of libertarianism than what they try to go for.
No, I there's a certain version of Christian presuppositional apologetics that I appreciate, although it's not even really a good grounding for Christian ethics or ethics generally. It's more of just a I don't know how you would phrase it. It's a useful thought exercise, but I don't think that it actually proves anything. And it's also like it doesn't really prove anything except to someone who's already a Christian. So it's just kind of like preaching to the choir, kind of internal apologetics, in my opinion. There is something. It was like when I was debating Andrew, you know, he wasn't able, of course, to pull the presup model on me because it's like, well, I'm a Christian, so you can't, you know, try to do that. So what he tried to do on me when I debated him was to basically say that I'm effectively a pacifist because I don't want to enforce my worldview, which I had to keep on correcting and be like, no. I think that you can enforce things like property rights on society. It's just I reject the idea of a centralized monopoly coercive thing we call the state as the means of how you enforce the non-aggression. But he just kept on, you know, that was my first sort of blood sports debate, and so I didn't know that the way to play that is you have to be very aggressive and not let yourself get interrupted 50 times in a row to try to get any point across. But yeah, in the way I approach the conversation, which I was curious, and like we're not here doing a like Christian libertarianism versus objectivist libertarianism or anything like that. But I thought it'd be useful to kind of like explore a little bit of like the, you know, I could show you the arguments that we make here at like LCI, and you can kind of see where they correlate or where they contrast with your own approach. But and this was kind of the point I was making in the comments on your stream. I was like, I feel like there's like this weird thing with anti-liber, because like Andrew's not just like not libertarian, he's like anti-libertarian, anti-natural law, and there's this whole strain of mostly ortho bros and some Catholics. It's even worse with Catholics because it's just like I don't know how you can be a Catholic in the same tradition as Thomas Aquinas and reject natural law, but there are some Catholics and a lot of ortho bros who reject natural law outright and try to do this presup divine command theory thing, which I feel like and like I'm curious for your thoughts on this because like you being atheist, not a Christian, maybe, but you can maybe do like an internal critique here if you agree with my logic. It's like if you're going to believe in God and believe in the idea of divine command theory that God has you know sort of created a moral law, like a universal moral law. It's like, so are you saying that God created right and wrong and that, these rights and these wrongs are just arbitrary and just whims? Like they're just, you know, killing is wrong only because God said it's wrong and not completely divorced from actual reality and from logic and from, uh, any kind of standard outside of just the mind of God. Basically it's the argument that like, well, God just makes arbitrary, stupid rules and we can't intuit them at all. We can't discover them at all. Not only does that, I mean, not only does that, I think, make no sense if you're going to be a theist of any type to think God makes stupid laws. It's also just not what Scripture says, because Scripture says that God has, uh, like basically written the moral law on the hearts of men, and that it is discoverable and that it is coherent. But what are your thoughts on that in terms of that kind of game Andrew and others are trying to play?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, because I'm not a Christian, I'm not planning to get into like any sort of theology or anything. It does strike me that pretty much every Christian sect is like, well, no, we're the only biblical sect, and you guys are all, So I don't really have much of an opinion on which one is more biblically accurate or anything. But I will say at least the Thomists, because they have that connection to Aristotle, they tend to be a lot better than other sorts of Christians, like the Neoplatonists or whatever. So that does. If you're going to be a lover of Aristotle, then you've got to be a lover of his logic. You've got to be a lover of fundamentally this world is discoverable. This is knowable. It definitely strikes me as very Platonist that we're in an imperfect world and we just need to look towards the form of the good, and it's gonna beam down from up on high what is the good, and you can only ever hope to try and emulate it somewhat in this imperfect world, which I completely disagree with that right down to the root. I mean, that's fundamentally what an Andrew Wilson is. It's what Ayn Rand would call intrinsicism. She had that trichotomy, right? Most people say subjective versus objective. Rand recognized that objective, as used by most people, was actually a package deal. It was like outside the person, but also like it means true. So that's a package deal. So she split up into objectivism, subjectivism, and intrinsicism, where intrinsicism is like this outward approach where, the heavens or whatever are beaming down and commanding you on what is good, what is bad, and everything like that. Subjective, of course, just whatever you whim up. And objective, she recognized as like your mind recognizing some fact about reality, some connection between your mind and reality. Of course, she believed in objective morality. She believed that you have specific requirements for your own survival, for your own flourishing, given your own nature, and that was the basis for morality. So I would definitely reject the Andrew Wilson school of like this presuppositionalism. I also think it just kind of, it gets kind of lame after a while. It's like, yeah, okay, you're just gonna run like, okay, and what is your epistemology in every debate? It's like, okay, well, right, we get it. You've studied some epistemology. It's like, do you have any other, can you go off script? I mean, apparently not. It very much strikes me that it's the same script, and this is the same with Jay Dyer. This is why I was able to defeat him in the debate I had with him, even though I hadn't studied any epistemology or anything. I recognized that he was just running a single script every time.
Yeah.
So I was like,
exactly.
okay, I just won't go into the epistemology then. I'm just going to stay up in the law where the debate actually is. And I'm going to say, okay, well, is divine law, is that the same as the NEP? Is it compatible with the NEP? If it's not compatible, what is the alternative word? Is it incompatible? And how do you just, like, he just wasn't able to to handle it. When you recognize the script that they run, you can very easily just prevent them from completing their script.
Right, and it's just a dodge. Like, it's like they don't want to actually get into a conversation about, like, is it like I watched your debate with Jay Dyer, which it's a very quick debate because he rage quit rather early, and it was just so frustrating because, again, I'm a Christian too, and like there's a version of what Jay is doing, which I wouldn't use as a debate tactic, that I think is just an interesting philosophical conversation, but it does kind of bypass the heart of the debate, which is like, again, he's doing the same thing. It's like, well, are you saying God's moral law has contradictions? Like, again, that just seems to me that, like, if you're going to buy into, like, being a Christian, which I feel like that's something, like, if you get into that trap again, you should actually, like, pose this to them. Be like, are you saying God's moral law is just arbitrary and contradictory? Because that seems like a weird thing to believe in, to be like, I believe in this perfect being, creator of the universe, but his moral law is contradictory. Like, it just, I just don't get it. And I think to me, it's solely a tactic. I think it's cope. It's like they can't actually debate natural law. So they just have to try to avoid the debate by getting bogged down in these debates about epistemology and trying to do the whole presupposition game.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing they do, which actually I'll bring up this comment on my end from Michael, the libertarian. This is also a debate tactic that they do, which drives me insane. He says, "I can kill you, therefore the NAP is false." Is what a lot of these people think. It's insane. It'd be like saying, "I can write 1 + 1 = 3, therefore math is bullshit." It's logically incoherent. Yeah, and that's like the other thing. Like, obviously, neither of us are saying we live in a perfect world. Like, but it's just kind of like take a red herring to point out it's an imperfect world. It's like, yes, you actually, I stole this from you. You said this once, maybe you stole it from someone else, I don't know, but Andrew's whole thing is almost like he's trying to say might makes right, but then smuggle in divine command theory. But the point is that, like, might, sorry, I can't get this out. Might make, but it doesn't make right. That's kind of the distinction there, is that might makes, but might doesn't make right. Just because people can break a moral law doesn't mean it ceases to be a moral law. If you're going to think that way, then it's like for Andrew to live out that argument consistently, he'd have to be a moral relativist. He'd have to say nothing matters and just jungle ethics all the way down. But that's not what he's arguing for. It's just a debate tactic.
Yeah, and he's very explicit about this, at least in parts, where he's like, well, no, I'm just doing an internal critique because you're a relativist. And that's why it doesn't work when he can't do that internal critique because somebody isn't a relativist. He's no longer able, because he's very comfortable in that zone of, like, basically just being the jester and showing what relativism ends up in, saying, like, well, then I can just put you in a cage and rape you for eternity and everything like that. Like, he's very good at doing that sort of internal critique. But I mean, when he's outside of that, it doesn't work. And, like, with these sorts of people, where they're like, okay, well, how do you make sure that aggressions don't ever happen? How do you realize your non-aggression principle? One line I quite like going for is like, well, basically what happens is we contact the wizard of anarcho-capitalism, and he casts a spell that makes it impossible for anybody to ever aggress again. And that's my plan. Like, what do you want to hear from me? Like, yeah, people would have to agree with the non-aggression principle to some sufficient degree, such that it actually gets realized. Like, this isn't unique to every single philosophy, every single person who's proposing any sort of ethic or legal code or anything. They all contend with the exact same thing, that, yeah, people have to if nobody agreed with democracy in the entire world, there wouldn't be any democracies. Like, I'll just tell you that much. Like, it's so clear and obvious, but suddenly it's only for us, because we think our thing is objective, that suddenly, oh, because you're not a filthy relativist, now how are you going to enforce it? How are you going to make that objective? It's like, well, it's not made objective. The non-aggression principle is currently true. It is currently true that all these states are engaged in massive amounts of crime. That is currently true. That doesn't mean that we can suddenly just wave our wand and then they all just disappear. Nobody's claiming that.
No, absolutely not. And again, I think you're exactly right. I think when he's debating actual moral relativists, which is a large part of the population, both on the left and the right, so that works very well against that. But going up against uh, objectivists or any libertarian, and then especially, he doesn't seem keen to go up against me again, even though I've offered, or to go up against any other Christian libertarian, just to kind of say, fine. Same with Jay Dyer. I approached Jay Dyer about it, and he initially seemed interested, but then stopped responding to me. And listen, I could be looking into it, reading too much into it, but part of me just thinks that they kind of realize, like, I can't stay on script
Mm.
if I'm debating an objectivist or a Christian libertarian. So it's easier to, I mean, not to take too much of a jab, because I don't personally dislike Andrew, but it just reminds me of kind of like the what's the dig at Ben Shapiro, is that he only debates green-haired leftists on college campuses, and not often anyone of substance. I mean, like, say what you want about like Dave Smith and people, so I know some people think that maybe my camp, a libertarian, focuses too much on foreign policy and Israel and stuff like that. But it is like just frustrating where like you have people like Ben Shapiro who like just refuse to engage on the topic, and it's just like, okay, if you're so right, then just like debate someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Um, so I did want to point out just briefly here that, like, you know I, I've never felt the need to do the whole like objectivist Christian debate, because I just feel like, kind of as I've already alluded to, it's like I also believe in natural law. So like when I read through your course, I don't sit there and the entire time spurg out because I want to know what your epistemological grounding is for like why good exists and why evil exists. Now, I do think that, to some extent, what it's not so much an argument, it's more of just like, I guess, a emotional appeal or a preference, that like the only question I have for like the atheists and objectivists type is always just that, like, which I guess the answer to this is just believing it's like an evolutionarily developed sort of meme or behavior. But if my contention is just that good and evil have sort of different uses, and I think that uh, when we're talking about things being good or evil, or lawful or unlawful, it's like, I think that the Christian case makes a stronger claim in terms of like what is good and what is evil. I think on like a more materialist worldview, that when you're calling something good or calling something evil, I think it boils down to saying that things are preferable or not preferable, and that's based on if they are coherent and have contradictions. Sorry, if they're coherent and don't have contradictions, versus if they're incoherent and do have contradictions, which is kind of, I think, more or less what you do when you're going through your course, is you're kind of mapping out like, well, here's all the possibilities, and here's all the ones that have contradictions, and here's the only position that doesn't have contradictions, so that has to be what is right, which I think is a valid move. I just think that it's a little bit of a it's a little bit of a different claim, I guess. Like when I say something is evil, I guess I'm just adding a little bonus thing to it. It's like, it's not even that we disagree. It's like you're saying, like, this is unlawful because it's contradictory behavior that doesn't, comport with reality. And I basically say the same thing, and I just kind of add in, also, I think it's evil because I believe in as a Christian, that there is these like spiritual forces of good and evil that also map onto this, and that like when people do evil things, it's also like it's objectively evil in this other category that's like this higher metaphysical category. But it's like, so I mean, I guess like my evidence for why I think partly that exists is because like uh we all kind of have intrinsic natural reactions to certain things that we all know are evil. And if someone doesn't have those reactions, then we generally think they're, there's something broken with their moral compass. Like when we uh hear about things like CP, just to code it for YouTube purposes, we don't react at that and go, well, that's not good behavior because that doesn't comport to a logical, coherent framework that doesn't produce contradictions. It's the reaction is kind of like this sort of like disgust and just like, wow, that's morally reprehensible. And people that engage in that kind of behavior are, I mean, we make the joke about wood chippers in the libertarian community because like we think some people are, you know, gone down such a horrid path that we think, it's like, yeah, you broke the nap. Also, on top of breaking the nap, there's this higher evil and depravity to certain types of behaviors that we just we think that like certain evils are um put it this way, like when you're looking at it in a case of law, I think you would agree with me. Aggression is aggression, right? But then on another level, beyond just the question of law, there's other moral considerations where I think we as a species or we as humans look at different actions and go, yeah, these are both aggressions, but that action is especially evil and heinous and, way harder to forgive or overlook. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I definitely I agree with that part. As I mean, ultimately, I think law is a subset of ethics. I don't think it is exhaustive of ethics. I think some actions can be more destructive of the good, more destructive of human life than other ones. I think fundamentally, you have to ground this in something objective, and I think Ayn Rand's right that you have to have life as the standard of value. It's the only sensible starting point. So, like the evil thing about doing these things is that they're just completely detaching themselves from reality. They're cheating reality, and that's what truly undercuts them. You see this in every Ayn Rand novel, all the evil people. As it gets to the end, it's like, oh, all of their contradictions have built up and caused their own downfall. And I think that is, she's actually recognized something real there. You see this all the time, that like any like state crisis, they're in these big crises. Like the U.S. has this massive debt crisis at the moment. Now, what is causing this debt crisis? What is causing all these problems? Well, it's because they wanted to eat their cake and have it too. They wanted all the monies, and also without like causing the problems that would be inevitably caused by that. We recognize as Austrians, when you have all this inflation, it inevitably will lead into the boom bust cycle. It necessarily feeds into that. So that it's this short sightedness. Because I don't these people, they really do believe that they're able to just meddle with the economy and it'll be fine, and they can just keep going with that. But that contradiction, obviously you can't actually cheat reality. It doesn't work. Eventually reality is going to come back around and bite you in the ass. And that's exactly what the bust phase is. It's reality biting you in the ass. And that's why I abstract the Austrian business cycle theory out to a more general principle. I think it's more general than just business cycles. I say this in the libertarian video. I call it the cycle of evasion, where whenever you're evading reality to build up these fiat goodies, these fake goods, you inevitably run up to some point where, as it turns out, you don't have all these goodies, right? They were fake, and then you enter some sort of a bust phase, and then you can just keep lying to yourself further and trying to keep the psychological boom going, or you can try and actually face reality. And if you choose the former, then it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse. This is why you have like these super high time preference people who just spiral down the road into total depravity. Like, this is the vast majority of homeless people are like this. There's a reason why they're there, and it's not for the vast majority of cases not that the world is just so mean to them. That's the excuse they use, that the world is just so mean to them and they don't deserve it or anything. But fundamentally, it comes from their own choices. And this ties into why I think that the African continent is so poor. It's not because of evil whitey. It's because the people who live there, right? There are plenty of places. Hong Kong, that was colonized by Europeans as well. That was under the control of the United Kingdom for many years. Why isn't Hong Kong super impoverished if colonialism causes poverty? This is something that I think the leftists really need to grapple with, but of course they never will. Fundamentally, when you have this sort of chronic poverty, it's caused by trying to cheat reality to gain values. And that's what is truly evil, and that's why evil always leads to poverty. It has to. You can't have prosperity and evil at the same time. To whatever extent you have evil, you don't have prosperity.
I think I generally agree with that. I mean, I'm sure you would agree that there are also cases where people are, maybe they're not quite homeless, but they can be in extreme poverty just because they live in a nation where the government has engaged in such evil and contradictions and, economic, uh, you know, uh, mishandling that, we saw this with like Venezuela. Like most of the Venezuelans were probably living very poor, not so much because of their own choices, but because they're the currency that they're forced to use by their government is completely debased, and all the economic regulations have made it so that the opportunities there weren't as uh, you know prevalent as they otherwise could be. Obviously, then if anyone tries to leave, you have all these other nation states that have borders and immigration laws that make it harder for them to go and find better opportunity elsewhere. So, not to mention, like, if you have family and kids, it can be hard. It can just be even hard and treacherous to, get up and try to move and go somewhere else and hope that it's going to be better. So,
So,
I think
certainly,
it's a little bit of a yeah.
there are like definitely good people in these countries, and generally, those good people manage to get out. Obviously, there are some who won't be able to get out, and that is a tragedy. I think that's the correct way to do, for instance, charity in Africa, not to give them just infinity dollars and infinity wells and everything. It's to try and look for the good people and keep exacerbating that brain drain to get all the good people out of there. But fundamentally, for like a country like Venezuela or for most of Africa, things like that, you have to keep in mind that the reason why the Venezuelans had a communist dictatorship is because most of them wanted a communist dictatorship. It's not like they were all just innocent victims, because if the vast majority of Venezuelans didn't want that dictatorship, it never would have gone to power. It would have dissolved immediately.
Perhaps, and I mean, I think that's true. That you can kick the can down the road a little bit more and ask, like, well, why do they desire it? And certainly, there's indoctrination and propaganda campaigns and things like that, which is part of why there's an information war. That's kind of why I think you and I do the things we do, because we think that there are a lot of people out there that are, in a sense, creating the hell that we are living under, because that's what they think. They think that the way to prosperity or the way to the better life is to continue advocating for more of what's actually destroying society. And so uh, there's this onus to try to now maybe we can't convince anyone, but certainly we want to try to convince as many people as possible to uh, break out of the indoctrination and sort of Overton window of what people think is normal in society for uh, things like governance and law and economics and things like that. So, but yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that's mostly correct. So yeah, I mean, anyway, I thought I thought that'd be a useful thing to talk about. Just the stuff with Andrew Wilson. It just drives, because again, like I have this whole, and we never got into it in our debate. Like in my debate with him, I had this opening statement where I went through the scriptural, like, because I was like, listen, you don't believe in natural law, whatever. I'll prove libertarianism from scripture. Then he would not engage with me on scripture or the biblical arguments at all, and just tried to pivot to all these other debate tactics. But it's just kind of like, I guess the point I just want to make is that, like, the Christian point of view believes in general revelation and special revelation. And if you're not a Christian, then you're not a Christian, and you're not necessarily particularly concerned with this. But if you are a Christian, or if you know Christians, and you just ask them on that, be like, are you, is it possible for God's general revelation and His created order, what's discoverable through reason and logic, to be in contradiction with uh, what is revealed in Scripture? And that's what we do at LCI, is we make the claim that there is no such contradiction. And so we have all sorts of arguments, which I don't need to get into here, because this is not necessarily the point of this stream, is to get into a full, like, me laying out the full case. I've done that on my show. If people look up episode 89, is my most recent, like, it was a Redux version of what is biblical anarchy, and I kind of lay out, and I go through, like, Old Testament to New Testament, why libertarianism is the consistent outworking of the entirety of what Scripture has to say regarding human authority and government. Something, though, that I also think, as a Christian, this will be a pivot. So as a Christian, I just kind of said, I think Scripture compels me to be a libertarian, but I also think natural law compels me to be a libertarian. Reason and logic dictate that I should be a libertarian. And I think the same applies to the pro-life position, which I wanted to talk to you about. I thought this, and this isn't to be a debate, but I kind of want to, and I actually did my best to do a lot of prep work on this, but I want to, it's easy to make the Christian case for being pro-life. I want to try to make the case from a libertarian natural law perspective, using your framework, why I think the pro-life position is the right position. And so I'm excited to do this, because I think it'll be interesting to kind of, expound some of the core principles that we already talked about, and talk about them more. And I just want to see what you have to say to some of these arguments, and where I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff where we agree, and then I've predicted where we're going to have some disagreement, and I think it'll be interesting to get into that. Now, I do think, though, what would be useful is, if you think it's useful, maybe we can start here. Like, maybe you want to just lay out the basic, because I know you're an evictionist, so I don't know, maybe do you want to lay out the basic evictionist position as regards to the fetus and unborn children and abortion and all that?
Sure. So this is basically it's the theory of abortion, which Walter Block came up with. It is not pro-life or pro-choice. He sees that as a false alternative. That pro-choicers, they're like, oh, you can just arbitrarily abort the baby, even if the baby might be able to survive outside the womb. Who cares? You're allowed to abort it. If you're really a consistent abortionist, you should allow it up until birth, at least for the most part, for these pro-choices, because you have the choice, right? Obviously, some will be an evictionist after a certain point. But I think the only, and Walter Block agrees, I think the only principal point, not birth, that's just a change of location. The only principal point is conception. That's when you go from, pardon me, random inanimate matter into an actual life form, which is self-assembling, unraveling itself, and growing up, effectively. That's the only principled position where you have a difference from before and after. But Walter Block is also against the pro-lifers, who would say that you're not allowed to evict. You've got to keep that baby, for the most pro-lifers, up until birth. This woman has to give birth to this baby. Now that's untoward, right? Because this is a positive obligation. We're against positive obligations. Ironically, we normally say we're against slavery, but I guess Walter Block would be potentially fine with slavery if he put it in a contract or whatever.
Gosh.
But yeah, I disagree with slavery, voluntary or otherwise. So what the evictionist says is it's the exact same standard as you would have for, like, a tenant if I was renting out my house to someone. Now, I would be allowed to, at any point, say, no, I don't want this tenant anymore. They got to get the hell out of here. But that doesn't mean that I'm allowed to sneak in whilst they're asleep and hold a gun to their head and shoot them and go, okay, doc, get this fucking corpse out of me. Get this corpse out of my house here. Clearly that's untoward. Now, what could you do? You could go up to them and hand them an eviction notice and say, hey, pack up your shit, you gotta get out of here. Right? And now, obviously, if they refuse, you can start using force against them. But you're not allowed to just arbitrarily use force against them. So the same is true of the baby. I agree with Walter Block. You're allowed, the mother, because she owns her own body, she's allowed to evict that baby at any point during the pregnancy. Now, she's not allowed to do so through arbitrary means, and this ties into my theory of guardianship. I didn't come up with it, but I agree with the theory. She would have to present the opportunity to other people, if they wanted to adopt the baby, to try and fund some procedure to keep the baby alive. It's like, okay, well, instead of going in there with like calipers or whatever, we want to induce labor in you, and then we're going to fund an artificial womb. Some Christian group or whatever. They could do this for women, and then at that point she's got to go along with it. There's these adopters who are willing to take the baby. She's not allowed to forestall the baby from them, and just choose. No, I'm gonna keep the baby inside of me, but I'm gonna cut off life support or whatever, and you're not allowed any access. Like, no, that's forestalling, not allowed. Or even, no, I'm gonna keep the baby inside me and I'm gonna poison it, right, which is another method you could use. Nope, not allowed. That's just straight up murder. So this is the basic idea, and the real beauty of this idea, aside from just I think it is correct, but the beauty of it is that as technology keeps progressing, if this was implemented anywhere, the technology for saving these babies earlier and earlier and earlier would keep progressing, and eventually you get towards pro-life in the as n tends towards infinity, right? You tend towards every baby survives, right? And the mothers don't have to. You can kind of eat your cake and have it too here, right? The mothers don't have to care for the baby they don't want, and people who want to take care of these babies, they can take care of the babies, and it really it seems like just the correct solution to me. I don't see any issues with it. Yeah, that's basically like the elevator pitch for evictionism.
Yeah, and I definitely think that evictionism is preferable to like the standard pro-choice position, for kind of the reasons that you stated. I mean, I think I mean, for one, it effectively bans, uh, because for one, I think it just reckons honestly with what abortion is, because abortion is typically not just eviction. Abortion is like we're killing the baby in the womb and then removing and discarding the dead fetus, whereas evictionism might say, well, you have to swallow the bitter pill that eviction might not result in the baby surviving, but you need to at least, you can't forestall people who want to, say, fine, you're going to evict the baby, we're going to try to save the baby's life and help it survive outside of the womb. And I agree with you about the point about that also, like, creating a market then incentive to increase that technology and move towards more babies being saved. So I think there's something about the evictionist position for all those reasons that I really do respect. Now I guess I'll try to make the libertarian pro-life position, and this is, I mean, not really. I haven't done most of the work on this, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, but one of my mentors is Carrie Baldwin, and she, I guess, famously for libertarian circles, did a debate on Walter Block on evictionism at the Soho Forum, pretty many years ago now. At this point, I think it was actually one of the last Soho Forum debates before COVID. I remember this because I remember at that debate they advertised the debate between Scott Horton and Bill Kristol, but then that one got delayed because COVID hit. So I think it was like the late 2019 is when Carrie Baldwin debated Walter Block. But that's when that was like the first time she kind of like publicly put these arguments out there, to my knowledge, in a big way. And she's been further developing them, and she works for us here at LCI, so I'm very familiar with her position. So I'll be doing my best to represent that to you and get your feedback on it. So I think the first place I wanted to start, and I kind of anticipated we'd probably agree with this, but I think we would agree that uh, conception is sort of the standard where life begins, and that the fetus, upon the at the end of the conception process, which I'll just add some. This is some of, like, what Carrie's work is. There's a lot of people that think conception, like, they'll conflate it with fertilization, or they don't know what it means. But conception is actually like a multi-day process. And so, like, our position would be basically that at the end of conception, the egg has been fertilized, it's been implanted on the uterine wall, and it's begun to become self-regulating and autonomous. And so you have this beginning
But
of
just
a
as a
new.
quick question, is that basically
Yeah.
to like deal with like ectopic pregnancies or whatever, where it kind of shows up in a weird spot and it's not going to survive there or anything?
Um, Sort of, partly. That's a good question, because I guess if because the from my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, I think the ectopic pregnancies, they are still self-regulating and trying to grow normally, but they're not in the right place, and so it then poses this huge risk for both the fetus and the mother. And so, I mean, obviously, the pro-life position, I mean, at least 99% of the time, other than like weird, like, religious fanatics, would say that, like, when there's a conflict between the life of the mother and the life of the baby, it's kind of just a math problem. It's like, well, uh either they both die or you remove the fetus, because the fetus won't survive there anyway and will pose a health risk to the mother. So, but yeah, it's the main point is that, and obviously, maybe one day they'll be able to do transplants from a ectopic pregnancy into either that maybe the mother themselves would want to keep the baby and just have it transplanted into the uterus or into a artificial womb or someone else's. So that's all possible still. But the main thing is, like, at the end of conception, when it becomes self-regulating and it's its own organism, uh, directing its own processes internally, which I think is important, because, like, one of the criteria for self ownership, which I think we would agree on, is that relationship between uh like the person and their body, and that, like, they are directing their body, right? Like, I don't own you, because, like, even if there's the slave argument, like, I could use coercion to sort of say, I'm going to use force to tell you what to do, but I still don't own your body, because I'm not in direct control of your body. I'm using indirect means to sort of, like, force you to bend to my will, but it's still you who owns your body, because you're the one that directs what your body does, both, you know, what you have control over. And then, of course, there's also a bunch of, behavioral and just natural processes going on that your body, it's you consciously and subconsciously directing those things, right? Not, we're not like a weird organism where we're multiple people in the same body, or multiple minds occupying the same body or something like that. So, but I guess, do we pretty much agree on all that?
Yeah.
Okay. But I guess, which I was pretty sure that we did. I guess the crux, because there are people. It was useful to ask that and talk about that, because there are, of course, plenty of people on the pro-choice side who would just say, nope, it's not a human being, it doesn't have self-ownership and all that, and they just try to, sidestep it that way. So, but we pretty much agree that, the only consistent standard is conception, and that they do have self-ownership. And it's probably worth mentioning here that, we already brought up guardianship a few times. We obviously believe, I think we both believe, that, like, they have self-ownership, but that babies and children and minors, that, like, the reason there is a guardianship is because they don't have the fully developed capability of voicing and expressing their will. And that's developed over time to the point where, adulthood is sort of like the marking of the passage of that, like, oh, you've developed to the point where you now can fully communicate your will and be uh, a complete self-owner. Um,
And by the way, as an aside, that this also would apply to like a person who's like passed out in the snow or whatever. As far as law is concerned, they're identical to a biological child in the sense that, well, they can't actually direct their own survival or advocate on their own behalf anymore. And so somebody can come along, like a paramedic can come along and take guardianship over them and move them to a hospital and start caring for them if they so desire. Yeah, this obviously also applies to the baby in the womb because they clearly can't, talk for themselves or anything yet. They don't understand what's
right,
going
exactly.
on. If they've even got like a brain fully developed or anything.
Right. And there's all sorts of like, we've talked about this in other contexts, but like, the person who's passed out or is in a temporary coma or something like that, there's all sorts of different criteria people will try to use, or they'll use things like heartbeat, but it's just, this creates all sorts of contradictions where it's just like, no, even people who are adults who, temporarily lose their heartbeat or their consciousness or something like that, like they're still self-owners. And even when they're in those states, you can claim a almost temporary, guardianship to be like, ooh, this person's unconscious on the side of the road. I'm going to presume they don't want to be left here to like, potentially die. I'm going to take them to the hospital and get them medical treatment or something like that.
Unless they got a DNR or something, because then you know what their will is.
Yeah, true, exactly. So, so we've established the fetus as a self-owner with rights. So the question becomes if there is any justification within libertarian legal theory for using force to evict the fetus from the woman's body. And, we would both agree as libertarians, as ANCAPs, that the only justification for using force against a self-owner is that the self-owner in question has committed some act of aggression. And so I guess the question we have to ask is first, has the fetus committed aggression? And of course, then we need to be clear about, because for there to be aggression, there has to be a conflict. So we would have to be clear about what the conflict that's being alleged here is. And so I would imagine your claim is something like the fetus is unlawfully occupying the woman's body without her consent in the case where the woman's will is to not be pregnant. And so that's what would give her the right to evict the fetus. And so, like, would you agree, because this is what Walter Block's argument was, would you call the fetus a trespasser? I guess is like the first question I would ask.
Yes, they obviously don't have mens rea or anything, but there is actus reus there. The woman wants to exclude this baby from her body. The only way to go about doing this is to literally take the baby and remove it from the body, because the baby can't walk out on its own, of course. But yeah, there is a conflict here. There's a conflict over the use of the woman's body. The only way to resolve this conflict is to get that baby out of there. You can't get the mother out of there, because you teleport the mother away, the baby's out of the body anyway. Like, you got to remove the baby somehow, or else you've got conflict engenderment.
Right. And so, and I also presumed we would agree that there's no mens rea, because there's no will on the part of the fetus deciding to be there. No intent. There's no like decision being made. In fact, the science shows that like the woman's body is the one that's kind of facilitating all this and acting to foster the fetus and provide nutrients to the fetus. And so yeah. So mens rea meaning that there'd be a guilty mind or something like that, which obviously does not apply here. So yeah, the debate would I guess come down to if there is actus reus, since we've established there's no mens reus. Now, this is, again, I want to be really precise here because I think this is where the debate really matters. you draw a distinction in your framework, to the best of my understanding, reading it, between action and mere behavior. That action is purposeful behavior, which is like the intentional implementation of of a means towards an end. And mere behavior is just mechanical biological process, like the beating of a heart, the operating of your digestive system, things like that. And these are not actions in a praxeological sense because there's no intent, there's no selection of means, no pursuit of an end. And so I would say that if we apply this distinction to the fetus, what the question would be, what is the fetus actually doing that would constitute an act? Because the fetus is really not directing anything of the woman or the mother in this case towards itself. It's managing its own resources. It is accepting the resources that the mother's body is giving him or her, but the mother's body is doing that on its own. It's naturally designed to do that. It's not like the fetus is like, I'm not saying this is your position. Some pro-choicers will kind of like describe the fetus like it's a parasite and like it's robbing from the woman's body. And now, granted, my wife's been pregnant 5 times, and emotionally, it can feel like that sometimes, right? Heck, even after they're born and you're breastfeeding, they can feel like parasites that are sucking the life out of you. Sometimes when my wife is like done breastfeeding, she's like so thirsty and hungry. She's just like, I've had the life force sucked out of me. But it in the case of the the fetus in the womb, it's not actually even just through behavior or implicitly. It's not going out and taking from the woman's body. The woman's body is directing the nutrients and whatnot and warmth and things like that. Itself. Same with like the blood supply and things like that. It's automatic. So there's really not any act on the part of the fetus. It didn't act to create itself. It didn't act to be in the woman's body in the first place. It didn't cross a threshold. It's not pursuing an end. It's not selecting means. It's just existing and developing through its own internal biological processes with what the mother is naturally and automatically providing. So I guess my argument is, by your framework, because of this distinction between action and mere behavior, I don't think that there's even actus reus in this case. I don't think I can constitute that. If I wrote this in like syllogism form, like premise 1, actus reus requires at minimum an act, a purposeful or at least directed behavior by an agent towards an end. Premise 2, within libertarian praxeological framework, action is distinguished from mere behavior. Mere biological processes do not constitute acts because they involve no intent, no selection of means, and no pursuit of ends. Premise 3, the fetus does not direct any of the mother's resources towards itself. The mother's body automatically and naturally provides shelter and nutrients to the fetus as part of its own biological function without anyone willing it. The last premise is premise 4. The only thing the fetus does is receive what the mother's body naturally provides and use those resources for its own autonomous biological development and growth. And this is mere biological behavior, not purposeful action. And so the conclusion would be, therefore, the fetus has performed no act in a praxeological sense and therefore has no actus reus. There is no guilty act to respond to, and therefore no justification for force against the fetus as a defensive or exclusionary response to aggression. So anyway, I threw a lot at you there. If you need me to clarify anything, let me know. But what's your thoughts?
Sure. So I think I would be partial towards the idea that there isn't a conflict with the fetus, because the fetus, of course, isn't acting. But I would reject then the premise that you're only allowed to use force against an aggressor. Again, I don't talk about it in terms of when force is not allowed or not allowed. This is why I think the conflict avoidance framework is a lot better. It says you're not allowed to initiate conflicts. Now, if you were staying at my house, even if you haven't initiated any conflicts with me, I'd be allowed to say, hey, I'm evicting you. Off you go, get out. Now, there would be a conflict if you resisted that, or if somebody else came along and prevented me from evicting. Let's say you're asleep, you're in a coma, in like my hotel room, And it's like, well, geez, I run this hotel. I'm running a business here. I'm going to get this guy out of here, send him to hospital or whatever. I got to sell this room like for the next day, Then if the government came in and was like, stop, you've got to keep him there. Now, you didn't initiate that conflict over the hotel room, but there is now a conflict over that hotel room, right? So there is a conflict over the woman's womb when she's being prevented from evicting the baby, right? I'd be willing to concede that the conflict isn't with the baby itself, but there is still a conflict there. So
okay,
fundamentally, she owns her what? Like the fundamental fact of the matter here is that she owns her womb, therefore she's allowed to exclude whatever she wants from her womb, including a baby. And she's allowed to exclude that baby even if the baby hasn't done any wrong, even if there is no actus reus. Pardon me. Even if there is no conflict yet, right? That doesn't change anything about the fact that she's allowed to take this baby and put it outside of her.
So the first thing I would say is that I do think, well, I get you're trying to demonstrate the principle of eviction and that there can be a conflict, even if there can be a conflict that's like a person needs to leave and maybe the conflict isn't with that person but with an outside force. So I get the point you're trying to make there. But I do think there's a little bit of a difference with like the yes, she owns her womb. Also, her womb, in this case, is doing what it's naturally designed to do. And so there is something there's. I'm not saying this is your position, and this isn't
people in your chat
necessarily
saying
an argument I had. Oh wait, sorry. I was muted for that on my end. Sorry. Let me repeat myself. I said that I get the point you're trying to make regarding that there can be situations where there's no actus reus with the particular person you're trying to evict, but there's still a conflict. I do think it's a little bit different because like the hotel room is not like part of a biological organism that is like designed for holding people. That's like something that you've made. So there is something about about the analogy that I think breaks down for me. But just beyond that, that's kind of a side point. I anticipated that you might say something like, yeah, the woman, even if there's no actus reus on the part of the fetus, she owns herself. She has a right to evict the fetus from her body regardless, even if we're not going to necessarily say it's an act of aggression that the fetus is there in the first place, that just basic enforcement of property rights permit removal. Now, technically, I'm going to be careful on how I phrase this. I think that you're kind of right, that there is a right to evict. But I don't think that eviction implies, like it's not this magical word that justifies any means of removal is okay. And I think your own framework actually supports this,
I'd agree with that.
the means of exclusion must be proportional to the situation, and that you can only use the force that is actually.
Be very clear.
I'm not done. It's proportional, and what is required, like what is ever required to remove well, I think there's two distinctions here. I think there is, if someone is, I know where you're going with this, I think. If someone's an aggressor, you're justified in using what the threshold is what's required to stop the aggression.
Mm-hmm.
But removing someone from your property who is not an aggressor, though, I don't know if that standard necessarily applies. But you would agree that there are limiting principles. And the other thing I wanted to point is that there's also a limiting principle of just, for example, you brought the example of, let's say I was over at your house and we're just kicking back, watching something on TV, drinking a few beers, but I'm starting to it's getting late. You're like, all right, Jacob, it's time to go home. I need you to go home. I got to go to sleep and get ready for work tomorrow. And then it's like, all right, now I need to go get my keys, need to put my shoes on. Oh, I need to go take a piss quick, go to the bathroom, and then I have to walk, from like one side of the house to the other. And let's say all that takes 10 minutes. Well, you have expressed that you want to evict me from your house. I'm not a trespasser during the time that it takes for me to actually like go through leaving your house. Even if like I just had all my stuff on me and I got up and left right away, you can't say, Jacob, I need you to go home. 1 second passes and you go, you have trespassed on my property. You have violated the NAP and I'm going to shoot you dead. Right. Another example would be like, if you change your mind, it's like if like, I invite you up on my hot air balloon and then like we're up in the hot air balloon and then I find out like, you did something that really like made me mad or something. And like, I want to kick you off. It's like, well, I have a right to kick you off my hot air balloon because it's my hot air balloon. But my right to evict doesn't give me the right to push you off the hot air balloon while we're, 1,000 feet up, above the ground, right? So there are space-time continuum restrictions on the right to evict, as well as proportionality and, there's the consideration of, what is required to remove them, but there's also these other considerations as well. And that's where I would argue that when we're talking about a eviction of the fetus, I say you have a right to evict when you get to the point of viability, because this is more analogous to you're waiting to land the plane, you're waiting to land the hot air balloon before you evict the person. I think that there's almost, when you evict a fetus before, I'll end on this, when you evict a fetus before viability, it's not just eviction at that point, even if you are not forestalling, right? Even if you're saying someone can come and take this fetus and try to preserve their life, but the natural habitat of the fetus and where it's designed to be is in the mother's womb. And we don't know. It's not a given that technology is ever going to get to a point where, an 8-week fetus, for example, is going to be able to survive outside of the womb. And so, I think that's more analogous to the situation where, because evicting the fetus at like 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever is like, well, that fetus is most certainly going to die. It's much more analogous to me pushing you off my plane because while we're up in the air. That's not just eviction. That's eviction plus lethal force. And I get the objection to this would be, but man, you got to wait a long time. But that can happen with anything. A plane ride. Let's say we're at a plane. It might be a 12-hour flight, and I have to wait until we get to our destination to kick you out. What if we were on a spaceship and we're traveling to the moon or to Mars and it takes, weeks or months? It's like, well, I have a right, I have a property right to evict you from my spaceship, but pushing you out into the void of space kind of seems like I'm not just evicting you, I'm also killing you at that point. So that's where I think there's a distinction to be made.
Sure. So the limits here are given to us by guardianship theory. That's the fundamental thing. So if I take you up into my hot air balloon and then I want to kick you out halfway through the ride, well, the thing is, you're actually a child in a certain respect. Namely, you have a limited capacity for action, and you can't just get out, you can't just do whatever the hell you want here, right? You've become a child to that extent that you are no longer free to act. So this is where we get the gentlest means, is that I can't forestall you in that respect, because you are a child in that respect. I've become the guardian of you in that respect. So how do I go about that eviction? Well, the way you do it is you land, right? And then you can get out, and then I've fulfilled my guardianship. I haven't forestalled that right of guardianship from anybody. And so you're now free to go. And this is the key point here, is that you were saying that, well, you're allowed to evict after the point of viability. The point is that viability depends upon what means others are willing to employ to help the child. So this is not like some hard cut point or anything. And now this is entirely entrepreneurial. Let's say the baby was just conceived right now. There is technology out there to get this burgeoning fetus out there and even put it into an artificial womb. Right now, the thing's probably going to die with this, but it isn't technically inviolable. If somebody really wanted to put all their, resources into this thing, it's possible. Like, we have grown sheep, I believe, from an embryo all the way in an artificial womb before. And so that's the thing, is that viability depends on what others are willing to do with respect to the baby, how much effort. And that's the thing, is it's on them, it's on the potential adopters to try and figure out the best path forward to completing this eviction. It's not on the person who wants to do the eviction. It's on the potential adopters. Now, the person who wants to do the eviction, they certainly can't just go, oh, no takers in 3 seconds time. Okay, well then I just, induce labor, and then it goes out on my floor, and then I step on it on the way out or anything. Obviously not that, right? They've got to give the opportunity for somebody to try and save the baby. But there are limits to what that involves, and yeah, the baby, it might be very dangerous for the baby to be evicted at this point in time. But the mother doesn't want to take care of it anymore, so it kind of sucks for them.
Make sure I'm unmuted on both ends. Also, sorry, I know someone's complaining about my because we're doing this on Discord. My Discord notifications are on, so there's just a bunch of chats popping off right now. So all the beeping, not much I can do about that. Unfortunately,
you can put on a streamer mode or do not disturb, and it should go away.
How do you do that? Is that under video and voice settings, or?
Go into your settings. You should be able to just search for streamer mode, and then enable streamer mode, and then it'll cut all notifications and everything, and also it'll truncate usernames and everything. So, if you accidentally like flash your Discord, it won't be like a full government name of someone or something.
I didn't find that, but I just found the I quickly found just disable notifications, so that works too. So. Shut up! Just turn the notifications off, you damn boomer. I'm not I'm a Discord boomer. I've not used the streaming stuff on Discord very often. Anyway, I thought it might have taken too much time, but so anyway, getting back to this. So I'm gonna press on this because if I Steelman, your position first, make sure I understand it. You're saying that it can be lawful to evict if someone's claiming that guardianship and you set it up ahead of time, and the person who's accepting the guardianship is then saying, we're going to try to take this fetus and transplant it into this artificial womb, and maybe it's like a 0.01% chance that this 8-week fetus will survive. But you're saying even in that case, that then when the fetus dies, that there was no wrongdoing by the woman evicting the fetus or on the person accepting. Because for me, the way I read the situation is it feels to me almost like they are presuming to sort of, in their guardianship transfer here, to be like, well, we think the 0.01% chance of survival is a okay, acceptable risk for the fetus. It's like, because I'm trying to think about this in guardianship for like my own children, would I be justified in, it's not medically necessary for the child. And if I elected the child into a procedure that they only had a 0.01% chance of survival, I still think that I could be legally charged, with murder, in that case. I don't think that just because there's a small chance someone might survive something. I mean, that it's like, this isn't exactly analogous, because there's probably a higher chance of survival here. But if I push you off my plane, but like I strapped a parachute on you first and pushed you out, well, like we don't know that the parachute's going to open. We don't know that you know how to use a parachute. We don't know that even if the parachute opens, like then something could come and rip the parachute. Like there's so many things that could go wrong, and you could still die, right? So I don't think that like me pushing you off my plane just because I've given you a parachute would be acceptable risk. Now, I'm not saying, this is one of those things where I think we would at least agree there is a bit of a continuum thing here. And I'm not saying that like the threshold is 100% certainty of survival, because like, I mean, there is no such thing as that kind of certainty in any action. But, certainly I think it has to be, a threshold that's like more likely than not, and not, or something like that. So what do you think? Where do you think I'm wrong on that?
So, it would be entirely proper within your role as a guardian of a child to elect them for this 0.01% chance survival surgery if the alternative was definitely dying. Right? In that case, then yeah, you absolutely are allowed to go in and take out that brain tumor or whatever. That would be so terrible. But fundamentally, like ethics, it's not built on percentages. What is that? Right? How do you get such a percentage? You'd have to do that trial and try this thing out and see how likely it is to work. And that's fundamentally the point. Is it's up to the people to try and be entrepreneurs and figure out, well, how can we give this baby the best shot at surviving here? Because the mother doesn't want it anymore. And maybe nobody's willing to take on that burden for themselves. Okay, then it's going to be tragic. The baby will die, right? They have means of cutting off. I say fucking dismissed. Hold on, gotta answer this. Hello?
We'll take a short commercial break. So, let's see here. I'll read through some of the comments on my side while I see Carrie and iFi are having some kind of debate in the chat on if I was following it correctly in between my conversation with Zulu on like if God's law is in conflict with nature or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. I'll debate you, bro. Bring me up. Yeah. Okay. I'm already actually Zulu and I will have to hop off here soon when he gets back, so we'll have to wrap this up. But because my hard out is right around 8:00, although Zulu might have a hard out of now, depending on what the phone call was. Which would be unfortunate because we were getting into some of the really good stuff there. Yeah, he did take a phone call on a live show. I guess it must have been an important call. I don't think he would have taken it otherwise. Because he was like, "Oh, I thought I'd turn my notifications off," and then he like, "Oh, I got to take this." So, hope everything's all right. So, let's see here. Yeah, you guys were having some kind of debate over, or nature is outside of God's control. I don't know. Where I'm going to go with this is just that I don't think that, again, I think what I really want Zulu to contend with is this, that, again, eviction can be bound by space-time and natural sort of biological conditions and limits. It's like, and I don't know that you can escape that by just saying, well, we can try to create scenarios where we make it more likely for the person to survive after we've evicted them into the situation where it's very certain for them not to survive. I mean, like I have a right to evict you from I thought like I have a right to evict you from my plane, but just because, I put a parachute on you and you might survive doesn't mean that I was justified in evicting you at that point rather than waiting until we landed the plane, right? That seems to me to be the logical case to be made here. it just occurs to me I'm probably also still streaming to the because we're doing a simulcast here, so I'm probably streaming to Zulu's crowd too, but I can't see their comments. I'm almost while we're waiting here, I might pull this up on YouTube on his end and read some of the Zulu comments as well. This is an interesting predicament to be in. All right. Yeah, they're telling me, yeah, we can see you. If your goal is, I don't know. I can see the Zulu chat, so if any of you guys have questions you want to ask me, I can do that too. I'll keep going till 8 o'clock or so. I haven't seen any messages from Zulu, so although it's weird that I'm watching the stream and I see okay, it's at the sorry. That was silly of me. He's not back yet. And I don't see any messages from him. So we'll see how this goes. This is interesting. Don't see any questions from Zulu's chat yet. They are having their own internal conversation. It's funny how live chats go, right? Live chats where like there's like a show going on and like half the people in the live chat are talking about the show and then the other half of the people are just having random like, you know, their own little debates and spin-off conversations. See, on my side, I have a comment from Shufui. I don't know if that's supposed to be said as one word or if that's a bunch of letters, but it says, Jacob, what do you think of teleological natural law? I think you mentioned it at some point, but I may have missed a video you have on it. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm not like a Thomist or anything, but I mean, I believe in natural law. I categorize that in different terms as a reformed libertarian. You know, we would say that there is common grace or general revelation, but that we exist under a common grace order, and that the common grace order, you know, is bounded by certain like prescriptive norms for human behavior and human life and civil society. Basically, you know, the law of proportionality, which comes from you know, well, the law of proportionality and all this is instituted at the fall, but it's first talked about in Genesis 9, where after the flood, God institutes the lex talionis, the law of just retribution, and says that if a man sheddeth the blood of another man, then by man shall his blood be shed. And so this is the first time God is like instituting, like, hey, force can be used, lethal force can be used in response to lethal force. So it's the establishment of the principle of just retribution, and we derive from that also the principle of proportionality, and we see this restated in the New Testament as well. This is kind of what Romans 13 is talking about, where the sword, those in authority bear the sword to not be a terror to those who do good works, but to those who do evil, they don't bear the sword in vain. And so the argument from Scripture is, yeah, it's, you know, add in like, you know, do not murder, do not steal, you know, these are obviously allusions to, you know, universal moral laws that are part of, again, this common grace order that we live under, you know, common grace being juxtaposed with saving grace. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the 5-minute summary to the reformed libertarian conception of like natural law, and that being being grounded on a Christian basis and discoverable. I've gone into much more detail about that in podcasts with Carrie and Greg, who have done a lot of the pioneering of these ideas, which you guys should check out, reformedlibertarians.com. Carrie's also on the comments on my side. Thanks for trying to say my name. Yeah, I was wondering a bit about that since I know you're not a Thomist. Yeah, I did a whole episode live stream with Greg Baus just like a month or two ago, where we were responding to Joel Webbin, who's a Christian nationalist, and we were going into a lot of this stuff. So you might want to check that out. Let's see, is there any questions from the Zulu side. Also, let me see if Zulu said anything. Nope, it's not. We're at 8 o'clock, but I'll go a little bit longer. But yeah, if any of you, the Zulu crowd had any questions for me, I'll answer them quick. I'm trying to read through the chat, but you guys seem to be just having your own. The Zulu crowd, and so Zulu has his own Discord, and it's a private Discord. He only shares the link once in a while, and it's like ANCAP struggle session nonstop. I mean, it is just like, you go in there and they are just always debating all the time. If you go in there with a position, they force you to back it up. It's like an ANCAP debate bro coliseum on a Discord. So. And this is kind of what Zulu's live chat is. It's like they're just, instead of having their debates on Zulu on his Discord, they're having the debates in their live chat. So I don't see any questions there for me to respond to. They're asking each other questions. Also, Carrie just made a comment on my side, which I'll flag. The updated version of Faith Seeking Freedom. I don't have any of the advanced readers copies of that, but here's our first edition, which reads backwards because of using Discord. So sorry about that. Believe me, it says Faith Seeking Freedom, not whatever that says. But our second edition of this is coming out probably, I don't know, May, June. Definitely by July, because we're going to Freedom Fest. I know we want to have it out before then. But Carrie has put a lot of time into a updated, expanded version of what I was talking to Zulu about here today regarding the libertarian position to be pro-life, which, by the way, another point of clarification I should make here is that we're making the case to be like that libertarianism is philosophically, legally on the position of pro-life. Enforcement is a important conversation. We're not, Carrie and I are ANCAPs, so we're not advocating for a abortion ban from like the federal government. There are unlibertarian ways to enforce any law, including laws against abortion. We would advocate for a private law, polycentric, or I know the Zulu crowd doesn't like that term, so acentric or decentralized market approach to law, tort law and things like that for handling abortion. And obviously, like there's an aspect to the abortion debate which came out in this conversation, which is that like there's establishing what is morally normative, but there's also a discussion about what do we do to save lives? What do we do to convince more parents, more women and mothers and fathers to choose life rather than to choose abortion? And that conversation is not just merely about law, but also about economics and the role that society and communities and churches and families and the market can play in offering the mother all sorts of choices beyond just the choice to evict or abort. Michael asked, did I see Scott Horton interviewed Joe Kent? No, I did not see that. I started watching Tucker's interview of Joe Kent. I did not watch Scott's interview. That's cool. Yeah, I'm definitely interested to, that's a big deal. Someone, I mean, put it this way, Joe Kent is heroic. And I think he's been against war with Iran for a while. It's just a shame that like there were other people on this administration that I thought would have taken this kind of principled stand sooner. And the person most prevalent who I thought should have done this was Tulsi Gabbard, considering she's the woman who literally made money selling T-shirts saying "No war with Iran" on it. But oh my gosh, it's just so disappointing. So disappointing. Yeah, I think I'm going to end here. Although I feel like now I'm supposed to reach out and host and offer to host a debate between Carrie and iFi. So maybe that'll happen down the road. I'll see someone in the Zulu chat said fell for it again aboard. Yes, I did. Well, I wouldn't say fall for it again. I fell for it once because I became a libertarian in 2018. Did not vote in the 2020 election. I had voted Democrat before that, but I was a Democrat and then a Libertarian. I never voted Republican or voted lesser of two evils after I became a Libertarian. Other than this last election, I definitely fell for it, but it wasn't again. It was just the first time in my case, and it'll be the last time. I got caught up in zeal, in optimism, in thinking that perhaps there was just actually a chance of this time that maybe the lesser evil would be significantly lesser. And instead, I was not only wrong on it being significantly lesser, but it's actually, I think it's probably true to say that Harris would have been better at this point. Like it's hard to think Harris would have been worse than this. But I will take my lumps for my mistake and learn from it. Let's see. All right, I'm gonna hop off, guys. I hope Zulu's okay. I'll be praying that whatever is going on is fine. But I'm gonna end the call over here on that side. So, but it was good to talk with Zulu. Good to talk to his crowd again. I know we've had our clashes, but I very much enjoy these things. They're intellectually and philosophically stimulating and rigorous. So I'm gonna disconnect